Hello, I'm now live for day 3 of the virtual toe-up sock class. If you're out there, you can type a little hello into the chat bar. Let me know who's here. I'm going to wait just a minute before we get started. Got a couple people on. Hello, thank you for joining me on this toe-up sock journey. So today is day 3 of our class, and we're going to talk about finishing our toe-up sock. And y'all can ask me any questions you might have about toe-up sock knitting or anything we went over in class so far, and I can answer your questions. I anticipate that today's going to be a shorter lesson because the main thing we're going to go over is Jeny's surprisingly stretchy bind off. It is my favorite bind off for toe-up socks because it's really easy. It makes a super stretchy end. Sometimes when you try to do a stretchy bind off by, maybe just going up the needle size or just working on being loose, you still have a lot of tension on your bind off. But with Jeny's surprisingly stretchy bind off, I think it looks great. And it also is so stretchy. So it stretches out as much as you would want the cuff of a sock to stretch out. And I know that sometimes that's the hardest thing, is getting a good bind off, getting a good stretchy bind off that also holds its structure well, which this one does. So again, this is what it looks like from the top. All right, so if anyone's out there or whoever's out there, let me know who you are. You can go ahead and holler down at the chat bar. And before I get started on Jeny's surprisingly stretchy bind off, let me know if you have any questions on sock knitting at all. I'll just wait a minute. Looks like no questions yet. Okay, so hi, Rebecca. I'm glad you've been joining me all week for these 3 days. I'm gonna go ahead and say, what are weeks? What are days? What is any of this anymore? Hi, Laura. Thanks for joining. So if you've been following along and doing your homework, right, and whatnot, you should have a weird looking, as I said in the first class, it almost looks like the little Cabbage Patch doll socks we used to get. Time is just a concept, and nothing is proving that more than this whole shelter in place / quarantine / whatever you want to call it. So you should have a funky monkey little sock. It's so cute. So this is the smallest size in the winter weekend sock pattern. And you should have done your ribbing. So you have about 1 inch of ribbing. Hello there. Nice to see you. You should have about 1 inch of ribbing. And you should be ready to start your front needle stitches. For those of you who weren't here at the very beginning, we're going to do Jeny's surprisingly stretchy bind off today. It was first debuted / talked about on knitty.com, and I think the story was a woman named Jeny decided she wanted to create like something that was a complement to Judy's Magic Cast On for toe-up sock knitting. So Judy's Magic Cast On is what we learned in the first class, and it is a perfectly beautiful cast on to make your sock toes look like continual stockinette. And it also has no ridge. Doesn't have a ridge like a seam does, so it's very comfortable. Other uses for Judy's Magic Cast On include the top of a hat, the top of mittens, if you're doing, kind of fingertip down mitts. And if you wanted to do like a rectangular shawl, say, that was completely perfectly mirrored, you could do Judy's Magic Cast On in the middle and then knit each side. You can also use it for tube cowls, which I like to do when I do tube cowls. I cast on Judy's Magic Cast On, and then I put the stitches I'm not working the tube out of onto an extra circular needle and just kind of let it hang. The first couple of rounds are super, super awkward. But then after that, when you finish the whole tube cowl, you've got live stitches right there. And you can easily do your Kitchener stitch for that. And you don't have to put stitches on, you don't have to provisionally cast on. And it's good for any provisional cast on too. So anyway, Jeny's Surprisingly Stretchy Bind Off is what we're going to do today. So how you work Jeny's Surprisingly Stretchy Bind Off is you work your first stitch in pattern. So because we're working knit 2, purl 2, rib, we're going to knit a stitch. So we knit 1 stitch. And then because, again, we're doing knit 2, purl 2, rib, our next stitch is a knit stitch. When we have a knit stitch that we're getting ready to work, we're going to do a yarn over from back to front. Hi, Susan. Good to see you. So we're going to wrap the yarn from the back to the front and then go back to the back, wrapping the yarn completely around the needle before we do a knit stitch. I'm going to do a couple of these and then I'm going to tell you why. So what we have now are 3 stitches on our right needle. We have the first knit stitch that we knitted. We have the yarn over that we wrapped, and then we have the other knit stitch that we just knit. When you do a regular bind off, you generally work 2 stitches and then pull the first one you worked over the second one. Work 2 stitches, pull the first one over the second one. So what we're doing right now with this is we're adding a yarn over between those 2 stitches. Oops, and it slipped out, of course. That's okay. It's the beauty of knitting. It's easy enough to pick up. Okay, and so then to bind it off, we're going to grab both the first stitch that we knit and that yarn over that we placed. We're going to grab them both with our left needle and we're going to pull them over the last stitch on the right needle. And that is how you do a knit stitch, how you bind off a knit stitch in Jeny's Surprisingly Stretchy Bind Off. Now, the next stitch on our needle is a purl stitch. So we have to do our yarn over the opposite way. So we're going to do a regular yarn over, bringing the yarn completely around the needle back to the front of the work. And then we're going to do a purl stitch. And then again, we have 3 stitches on our right needle. We have the first bind off, we have that yarn over we did, and then we have a purl stitch. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our right needle, we're going to grab the first stitch and the yarn over. Let's see if I can do this backwards too. And we're going to pull them over the last stitch on the needle. So that's how you work Jeny's Surprisingly Stretchy Bind Off for both a knit and a purl stitch. And the reason you wrap the yarn the way you do is because you want to have as much extra fabric or extra yarn as possible between those 2 stitches, because that's going to help you stretch. So that's going to give you the extra yarn that you need to do that nice big stretch. So when you are going into a knit stitch, you wrap the yarn from back to front, purlwise, and then go all the way back to the back. So you're doing a complete loop-de-loop around your needle. When you're going into a purl stitch, you wrap from front to back, like you do a regular yarn over, and then you bring your yarn completely around the needle to the front. And it's just the same as when you're doing a yarn over going into a purl stitch, but you want to make sure you're wrapping the yarn completely around the needle. Does that make sense to everybody? Holler over there if it doesn't, or even if it does. And I'll show you a couple more. So I'm going to turn my computer. So I'm going into a purl stitch again. So I'm going to wrap my yarn over the top of my needle and all the way around. So I've looped it completely around the needle, and then I'm going to do that purl, and then I'm going to grab the first stitch, which was the last stitch I bound off, the yarn over, and I'm going to pull them over the stitch I just purled. Then the next stitch is a knit stitch. So because it's a knit stitch, I'm going to go over purlwise. I'm going to go from back to front. Oh, let me see. Back to front, completely around the needle. So you have a complete loop to loop, and then you go into a knit stitch. And then you're going to pull those 2 stitches over. So that's how you do it. I'm going to get through my next couple because I want to show y'all how I usually end it so we don't have that little jog. Because as you know, or might not have ever thought about, but when you're knitting in the round, you are not knitting a complete circle, you're knitting a spiral, right? Because when you finish one whole round, it's not like you finish it and then go up. It's not like crochet. You know, if you were crocheting, you could crochet a whole round and then do like a double crochet and then, you know, because you're kind of stepping up. But with knitting, you are, and I know that you can crochet in a spiral too, but with knitting, you are knitting a spiral, and you're stepping up every round. You're going up like this, and it's a, you know, it's not a spiral you can see unless you look super closely. But when you are binding off a, you know, even like if you're doing like a top-down hat or a pair of mitts or a toe-up sock, you end the spiral without having ended a total circle of knitting. So you're going to have what you've just bound off is going to be a little bit higher than the first stitch you bound off. Does that make sense? So when you get to the end of your bind off, oops, and I just dropped a stitch. When you get to the end of your bind off, you have to do something a little bit different to make sure that it looks more like a closed loop instead of having that little step. Makes sense? Okay, good. Thank you, Rebecca. This is one of the good things about doing a sock this small. I can get through this bind off pretty quickly to show you what I mean. Before I finish, does anybody want me to demonstrate either of the knitwise or the purlwise bind offs for you again? Because I have a couple more of each to do. Oh, Hazel and I made some hummus this morning, and it's very, very good, but it's fairly garlicky. So I can like have that, you know, that garlic mouth. I'm glad I'm not sitting next to you. All right, so just remember as you work this, you always do the opposite of what your next stitch is. You go over the yarn like you're knitting, you know, kind of knitwise from front to back if you're going into a purl. And if you're going into a knit, you go around from back to front. Okay, so I have finished. And so I don't know if you remember from my first broadcast, but I am a long tail person. I always want to kind of go for a longer tail rather than a shorter tail, because I would much rather have too much yarn and have to trim it than not have enough and then have to like rip out a row or start over. I'm gonna, sorry, I don't have my needles with me. Okay, so what I do when I am finishing my sock is, let me show you what this looks like. So as I finished, remember how we just talked about how knitting in the round is a spiral? So when you're finished, your last little area will look like this. See, this right here is a full stitch taller than this right here because you were knitting a spiral. So what I do is take my yarn needle and I go in to the loop. Oops-a-doozle, sorry. I go into the little loop that's right here on the top of the shorter stitch. And I pull that over and it closes it up and it's pretty seamless right there. Of course, I do it from the inside, which I should have done, because I always weave in my ends on the inside, but it's the same little loop. And then you don't see that little step, and then I'll weave down through the purl stitches right here. I'll weave in my ends. And I already wove my toe ends in. So this little sock will be ready to be worn by, I don't know, a Cabbage Patch doll somewhere in the world. So that is basically what I wanted to go over today. Like I said, I thought today would be a lot shorter. But if anybody has any questions about what we went over in any of our classes or about sock knitting in general, I am not, I don't know everything about sock knitting, but I do make a ton of socks. So if you do have questions, feel free to ask them. Also, happy Saturday. All right. Well, it looks like there aren't any questions. I super appreciate y'all taking this journey with me. It's been super fun. Would you talk about yarn choices? Oh, totally, Laura. I'd be super happy to. So in the handout, there is some information about that where I talk a little bit about it. And then I will, we'll call up that part and then I can babble at you a little bit about that too. But it's on page 3 of the handout. So yarn is really the most important component of a sock. And there are a couple things that I think are very important for sock knitting. Oh, thank you. Got these glasses at Jeny Optical. Yarn. I generally use I almost always use superwash yarn. I want to start by saying that. I don't think it's necessary, but if you don't use superwash yarn and if you don't use a yarn that has nylon in it, you want to make sure that it's pretty tightly plied and that it's not, that it's at least a 3-ply. Because if you only have 2 plies, and that's 2 strands of yarn that are twisted together to make the strand of yarn, it just isn't hardy enough for the kind of wear that socks get. So I say either something that is very tightly plied, and Laura Jean's DK, the Victory DK, is very tightly plied. You can see here, I'm just going to show you what it looks like, kind of see how springy it is. So it's really tightly plied. It's a 3-ply, I believe, or a sock yarn that has 4 plies or has nylon in it. Those are really good things. You also want to make sure that you are doing your sock yarn right by making sure you knit it at a tight enough gauge, because what makes holes in socks is friction. And so if you don't have a tight enough gauge, those stitches are too loose and they're able to move against each other more. If it's nice and tight, the stitches aren't moving that much against each other, like my little. So you want to make sure you have a nice tight gauge. You want to make sure the yarn itself is tightly plied, and nylon and superwash both do help, but they're not absolutely necessary. So My glasses I got at Jeny Optical. And I have oodles and oodles of glasses because I love being able to change them every day. Laura said that she's tried Jeny's surprisingly stretchy bind off on 2x2 ribbing and it didn't look right. The knits look like pearls and vice versa. What was I doing wrong? I am not sure. I will say that it doesn't look completely and totally, it doesn't look, it does have an aesthetic difference than just ribbing. Jeny's surprisingly stretchy bind off does. So this is what it looks like. And so it might be, see, those look like little pearl bumps. So I think it might, I don't know that you were doing anything wrong. I just think that you might have had different expectations for the bind off than the bind off was able to provide to you. And then Susan says that my stretchy bind off seems loose as it's supposed to. So that is something that does take some practice because, you want to have, the reason you're doing Jeny's surprisingly stretchy bind off is because you want to have a nice stretchy bind off, but you also don't want it to be floppy and loosey-goosey. So I think just with anything else, it's just a matter of practicing until you have the proper tension. I don't do it super loosely because I'm giving myself that extra fabric or the extra yarn between to give me that stretch. So you don't have to be super, super loose as you're doing it. So I hope that helps. Yes, Lori, the hole when you switch back over to the circular cuff area, for sure. That is definitely a problem because you're going, so Lori's talking about when you, after you've done your heel, when you start knitting in the round once again. And that is definitely a problem because you've been knitting back and forth. And so you don't have, you're kind of adding another, like, basically like half round almost. So I purposefully did not do my usual fix on this just so I can show you. So it's something that gets better when you've done toe-up socks a lot. So you can't really see it here. But what I do sometimes is when I'm on my back needle stitches, I will just grab a stitch kind of from the front and it's not scientific at all. And I kind of do it differently with every sock, but I grab kind of a little loop from the front of needle stitches and pull it up on my needle and then knit those two stitches together through the back loop. And I kind of play by pulling it up and seeing if there's going to be a hole or not. So, so that is what I do for those little holes, Lori. And then Rebecca asks, do I wash and dry? I wash. I do not, and I dry, I like lay flat to dry. I do not put in the dryer ever. And how I wash my socks is I have a lot of socks. So when I wash them, I'm washing like a big Rubbermaid bin's worth of them. So you can do this in a bowl or any kind of a tub that makes sense for how many pairs of socks you have. But what I do is I squirt some wool wash in. I really like, I have Eucalyptus, I have some Soak, I have Farmer's Daughters. I just bought some Tuft Woolens wool wash from my friend Brooke from Sincere Sheep that I have not yet used, but I'm going to. It's a bar soap of wool wash. And she said you just kind of cut off a piece and then use that so you're not putting the whole bar under the water. But anyway, so I squirt some of that, or I'll start some like kind of warm water. You don't want it hot. Heat is not good for hand knits because heat plus friction equals felting. And you can felt superwash yarns. But so I make sure I have kind of warm water, tepid to warm water, and some wool wash in a container. And then I put my socks in, squeeze, 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 because you want to get that wool wash throughout, all of the fibers. Squeeze, squeeze, squeeze. And then I just like walk away for at least 20 minutes. And as I like to say, or until I remember that I've done that. So sometimes it can be a very long time from then. And then I dump the water out of it. And I generally ask my husband to squeeze all the socks because my hands from knitting don't work so well anymore for that kind of thing. So Stefan usually squeezes the socks out for me. But you can squeeze and get as much water out as you want. Never wring, because again, if you wring it, that can put too much tension on your stitches, and you can start to break down the yarn a little bit and start some felting. And then you can put it in your washing machine just on spin cycle to get as much water out as possible. Or you can lay a big towel out, lay all your socks on, lay another towel on top, roll it up and step on it. You just want to get as much of the water out as possible. And then I have one of those those drying racks from IKEA that kind of folds open. So I just put my socks on there and let them dry for a day or two, depending on the weather. I don't generally, kind of like block my socks, but there are sock blockers. My dad actually makes sock blockers. I'll show you because they're super cool. So if you do want to block your socks, you can by putting, after you've done all the things to get your socks, as dry as possible, you can put them on here on one of these until they dry completely. And that's a good thing to do if you're doing a lace sock or something that needs to be opened up a little bit, some stitch patterning that needs to be opened. But does that show it backwards? Okay, so anyway, sorry about that. So I'll put a link to my dad's shop too, because his sock blockers are awesome. And no worries, Laura. I meant to talk about yarn choices when I was doing the intro, so I'm glad you brought that up. So Lori, the knitted with sock yarn that has nylon is called sock, and it is a fingering weight. The knitted with DK is the one that is tightly plied, 3-ply, that I use for a lot of my, this is an old label, but I use for a lot of my DK socks, and it holds up super well and is super bouncy, like I said. And yeah, I think I answered all the questions. Anybody have any other questions? Because I love talking about socks. So if you do, I'm glad to answer them. I have 3 super active socks going on right now. I'm designing a sock collection for May, and I've got 2 of the sock patterns designed and have to finish my samples. Every year, Laura Jean and I do a socks on vacay promotion. So it's to encourage people to knit socks during their summer travels and vacay. And this year we're gonna call it Socks on Vacay and probably also Socks on Staycay, because, we might all be home. But she debuts a national park colorway every week, and we work really closely with yarn shops to help them get their customers coming in and knitting socks all summer. So a lot of yarn shops that we work with do sock classes and knit-alongs and things like that. And we do a photo, not competition really. I mean, there are prizes that we give away. So I guess it is a competition, but it's more, community building. So people can see what everybody else is making with their socks. So keep your eyes peeled for that, for sure, that sock collection and the yarns that are going to be coming out to LYSs. Laura, I get you, girl. It is not you. It is the bind off. It's a weird bind off, but it is really wonderful. And Lori, you don't need the nylon for wear. Nylon is super helpful, but it also, the most important thing, other than the yarn itself, is that you're knitting it at a tight enough gauge so those stitches don't move around. So yeah, I don't wear my DK socks as much as my fingering weight socks, but I've never had any of them blow out or have a hole in them yet. I'm gonna knock on some wood. And then, oh, Laura's casting on that 70s shawl. That is such a fun shawl. I love that pattern. It's so fun. I hope you do the fringe too. I put a photo tutorial on my website for the fringe, and it's super, tedious as fringe is, but it's also super fun. And Susan, Sunday socks with Haleakala. I made some socks with Haleakala last summer. It's a beautiful color. And for those who don't know, that is one of Laura Jean's, one of Knitted Wit's National Parks colorways, and it's really pretty. And Sunday socks is the fingering weight version, basically, of winter weekend socks, where there are oodles of size options. It's toe up and cuff down. And then with Sunday socks, they also have a ton of different topping options, because it's a Sunday where like the foot of the sock is your bowl, and then the cuff is all the toppings. So there are a bunch of different toppings that are all really simple, actually. It's the sock that I make the most of, probably. That is kind of my basis for everything else. Glad you're doing fringe, Laura. Yeah, so what do y'all think? Do you feel good about casting on socks? Do you feel good about understanding what makes up a toe-up sock? Because I have had a lot of fun with this class, and I'm really glad y'all joined me on it, on this sock knitting journey, and I hope you all are able to make a ton of socks. I'm adding some stuff to the, the kind of info part below the videos. I'm adding links and information about the people I talk about in the videos. Like I'll add a link to my dad's shop, add a link to Knitted Wit, and a link to A Needle Runs Through It for tools. And there are also links to all of my social spaces. And if you're interested and aren't yet on my newsletter, sign up for it. Laura Jean and I are spearheading a social distancing with Shanna Jean knit along that's been going on. And so it's running both on Ravelry and on Instagram. So we'd love to have you join us. And there's a link to all of my patterns. So if you want to support me, I've got a lot of patterns. They're super fun to make. So that's always helpful for a designer when people purchase and make their patterns and share their patterns. And tag me, please, if you do make any of my patterns. And Lori, definitely these videos, these slightly awkward videos, are going to be up for for a long time. So if you need to watch them again, totally do. I'm going to think about some other classes I can do like this, because it is super fun. So let me know if there's anything you're interested in. And yeah, I think I'm gonna go. I think it's kind of a overcast day again today here. So I think we're gonna do lunch and then start the Lord of the Rings trilogy as a family. So I got a lot of sock knitting to do while watching Lord of the Rings with my fam. So I hope you all have good things coming up, and I hope you are able to make socks, and that it's going to help you in this kind of stressful time we're living in. I'd love to see y'all in our knit along, because we're having a really good time over on Ravelry chatting about it. And so I'm super excited. We just finished Star Wars, the whole shebang. So that's been one good thing. We've had a lot of family time, and it's been going really well. We're all getting along really well. So I'll go ahead and knock on wood for that too, though. You know how that is with kids. Okay, so everybody, thank you so much for letting me babble at you these last 3 days. And I hope to see y'all again. All right, take care of yourselves. Bye.